Hello, my name's Mike. I'm from the New York City chapter of the Zeitgeist movement, and this is my response to a video entitled Voluntaryist Thoughts on Zeitgeist Moving Forward by one Jacob Spinney. Well, let's see what Jacob has to say.
I have to admit that when I first watched the Zeitgeist Moving Forward documentary, there were a few concerns that I had. Then I realized that the Venus Project advocates for non-aggression. Finding this out was a breath of fresh air. At least we can agree that we should not use violence to force people to go along with the societal organization we advocate. I'm all for testing theories out in the real world, but until then, we need to rely on logical deduction. Let's go over some of the economic arguments in the documentary. The one that seems to keep happening over and over again throughout the film is equating what is currently happening under state-controlled economies with what would happen in a free market economy. This is a blatant non sequitur. For example, the film explains how state-controlled currency is nothing more than debt, and the inherent process within its creation will inevitably lead to a small group of people owning all the wealth. And then it seems to conclude that state-controlled currency is not the problem, but rather money itself is the problem. This is incorrect. In a free market, money is merely a representation of value in a market. It is not a Ponzi scheme to fraudulently amass property as state-controlled currency is. Real money serves two extremely valuable functions in an economy. The first function is a medium of exchange. Just like how liquid water facilitates the growth of biological life, money facilitates trade, and thus the growth of an economy. The second function that money serves is calculation. Without money, you cannot calculate profit and loss. Without being able to calculate profit and loss, it becomes impossible to allocate resources in the most efficient way. For example, let's say that a car costs 10 ounces of gold, and it would cost you 5 ounces to produce it. The fact that you'll make a 100% profit on your investment is the market's way of telling you that producing the car is the most efficient way to use those resources, as opposed to using those resources to make something else. The calculation problem is not how to create a car, it is whether you should use the scarce resources of steel, aluminum, carbon, rubber, plastic, and so on to make a car or to make something else, or whether you should use more scarce resources to make the car more efficient at the expense of making something else less efficient, or the opposite. Without being able to measure the wishes of consumers and the merit of entrepreneurial propositions against the limitless ways of allocating limited resources, which is what money does, then it becomes impossible to allocate those resources in the most efficient way.
You keep on referring to scarce resources, but you're actually assuming they're scarce when they're not. Like with your example of whether we should use the scarce resources of steel, aluminum, and rubber and plastic, whether we should use them to make a car or to make something else. But those resources aren't scarce. In fact, those resources are so abundant that even though we use them in incredibly wasteful ways by using them to build cars and other products that are designed to fail, and then throwing them away and then pulling more of those same resources out of the environment again so that we can build more products that are also designed to fail, even though we do that over and over again in order to keep people continually employed and to keep making profit, we are still not running out of steel, aluminum, or rubber, or plastic. So those resources are not scarce, they're abundant.
The only response that I seem to get from this extremely crucial point is that people could give surveys as to how they want current resources to be allocated, and then finding some kind of average among the surveys. This would be impractical to the point of being impossible. And even if it were possible, the data derived from these surveys would not be as accurate and up-to-date as the data derived from prices. Imagine that tomorrow you get an email from the Venus Project Global Resource Management System that we shall lovingly call HAL 9000. And the email lists all of the Earth's resources, and then all of the things that we have thus far figured out how to produce with these resources. And then HAL 9000 asks you for a priority list of what you would like to see produced, how many, in what form, and so on, with these limited resources in mind. HAL 9000 then collects all of the emails, averages out all the priority lists, and then proceeds to produce those particular things. There are many problems that I see with this idea. First of all, this would be an amazingly daunting task for any one person to do, let alone all of the people within the entire society. And the variables of technology, preferences, and the Earth's resources change every single minute of every single hour of every single day. Who would want to spend every single minute of their lives continuously taking and retaking surveys? Compare this amazingly complex and laborious process with in a moneyless society to simply buying or selling something in a society that does have money.
Jacob, where did you get the idea that in a resource-based economy, people would have to continuously take and retake surveys in order to tell the automated systems what they want to see produced? Maybe you fell asleep during the part of the film where they talked about the demand and distribution tracking system. See, just the way that in our society we use money to determine what gets produced, because every time someone buys something they're essentially voting with their money on what they want to see produced. In the same way, in a resource-based economy, every time someone takes something from an access center, or every time someone orders something online, or every time someone uses a 3D printer to create a custom product for their own use, every time someone takes one of those actions, they will be voting on what they want to have produced. And it'll be just as easy as using money. And our demand and distribution tracking system could easily track which items become more popular over time, therefore which products are being used by more people more often, or which products are being used for longer periods of time. And it could also track which items are becoming less popular over time, so they're used for less people less often, and they are sometimes used for shorter periods of time. And it will become self-evident that we need more of the more popular products, or the products that are being used for longer periods of time, and we need to build less of the products that are less popular or are being used for shorter periods of time. So we don't need enough stuff for everyone to own and hoard their items, where they will keep other people from using them even when they're not using them themselves. We need to only have enough stuff for what is being used at any one time, and that is the most efficient way to use our resources.
Another obvious problem that I see with that is that this process of taking surveys has no way of filtering out those who are not very good at guessing how to allocate resources and filtering in those who are good at guessing how to allocate resources. Instead, it just goes with the average of everyone's guesses. In a society with money, this problem is solved very easily. Scarce resources go through a bidding process. Each person makes a guess about which good fashioning that resource into will give them the most profit, and thus they are willing to bid on that resource up to the level at which they believe they can still make a profit. Inevitably, the resource will go to the highest bidder, who obviously believes he knows the most efficient way to allocate that resource. Otherwise, he would not have bid that high. If he ends up being continuously wrong, then he will continuously lose money to the point of not being able to bid on the resource anymore, and not being able to find anyone who will trust his business strategy enough to give him a loan. Without prices, not only is it impossible to have this evolutionary process of selecting the best people to make the decisions of how to allocate resources, it is also impossible to calculate if a bad decision has been made in the first place, short of mass starvation.
Well, we don't need to select people to determine how to allocate our resources. Like I said, when we have our demand and distribution tracking system, it will become self-evident how to allocate our resources and what we need to have produced. And as far as mass starvation goes, I'm aware that in the past, in communist and socialist societies, there were episodes of mass starvation. And I'm also aware that there are similarities between those societies and a resource-based economy. But assuming that if we implement a resource-based economy, just because it's similar in certain ways to those societies, that implementing that will also lead to mass starvation, that's just blindly referencing history without taking into account the proposed use of modern technology. We no longer need to worry about whether people will be incentivized enough to work hard enough to produce enough food for everybody, because people no longer need to do hard labor on a farm to produce food. We have hydroponic agriculture now that can be built virtually anywhere, and once it's built, it can run on renewable energy, and it can continuously and automatically produce food throughout all the 4 seasons of the year. So how could people possibly starve to death when we have technologies like that at our disposal? That I don't understand.
Okay, that's enough of the calculation problem for now. Another economic argument that the documentary makes is that the market is incentivized to intentionally make products that break down, so that customers will continually repurchase the product from them. Now, this may very well be true in this corporatized market, thanks to all of the government-created barriers to entry that make competition impractical and illegal, but it is wrong to think that this is what will happen in a free market. Think about it. Let's say that the current automobiles tend to break down and need to be replaced about every 10 years, and a car producer has found a way to create cars that will last indefinitely for around the same production cost. Other than the government, what is to stop the car producer from marketing these long life cars and grabbing a huge chunk of the car market? Either I, as a new car producer, can intentionally keep the lifespan of my cars low so as to hopefully get more repeat business, but at the risk of not getting any customers in the first place, since I now have nothing differentiating my cars from all of the rest, or I can lower my repeat business, but dramatically increase my sales and then just move on to another market sector once sales die down.
Well, you're not taking into account the difficulty and the cost of moving to another market sector, but let's continue.
Let's say that I create the perfect book. Now, would the fact that no other book I write will ever be better than it mean that I am now incentivized to never market the book in the first place? Of course not. It is profitable to use this strategy intentionally, of intentionally building your products to break down only if you have a monopoly. Otherwise, your customers will choose to buy from someone else. And you can only get a monopoly through bribing politicians to create barriers to entry, which would, by definition, no longer make it a free market.
Well, what you don't seem to understand, Jacob, is that free markets destroy themselves. I mean, just look around today. There are no free markets. Every country in the world has laws that govern their markets, so there are no free markets today. And if we ever had a free market, it destroyed itself by fostering the creation of monopolies and cartels. Because in a competitive free market, there's a natural gravitation for people to seek dominance in their sector or industry so that they can gain more market share and hence more profit. That's the nature of competition. So the final stage of success in a competitive free market is monopolies and cartels. And the competitive free market also gives advantage to the most ruthless and indifferent people in a society, because those people will be more likely to take advantage by reducing their production costs, even if it results in pollution, even if it results in the creation of potentially dangerous products that could hurt people or make people sick, or even if they have to cut their employees' wages real low. The most ruthless, indifferent people in society will be more likely to take advantage by reducing their production costs in that way. And the competitive free market also gives advantage to people who have a propensity to become addicted to power, because those who are not addicted to power are only going to want enough money and wealth to live comfortably until the end of their lives. But those people who are addicted to power will want more and more and more. And we see in our society today that there is a small group of people who have thousands of times more than they will ever need for themselves. And it's in a society where everything is based on money, it's axiomatic that whoever has the most money will have the most power. And if you have the most money and power, you have the most advantages with which to gain even more money. So, the laws that have been put in place to protect people from monopolies and cartels have only succeeded in slowing down the process by which the free market leads to those things. So as power-addicted people gain more money and more power, they will inevitably gain control over the government, like we're seeing today. And if there's anybody in the government who's a good person who wants to maintain government for the people and by the people, those people are going to be overpowered and run out of the government. Because if those people are not power addicts, they're only going to want enough money and wealth to live comfortably until the end of their lives. And so they won't have as much money as the power-addicted people, and those who are addicted to power will always win out in the end in a free market. So that's why free markets destroy themselves. And the very problems that you are recognizing with state-controlled currency and monopolies and barriers to entry and government intervention, all those problems you're recognizing are in fact what eventually results from the free market. So you can't solve those problems by implementing a free market, not in the long run.
Another issue the documentary jumps on quite a bit is equality. Again, it is logically invalid to look at the obvious inequality in this government-controlled economy and conclude that this same inequality would happen in a free market. No. The ridiculous amounts of inequality we see right now are precisely because of government intervention in the market that has given political favors to particular businesses that allow them to monopolize a market sector and thus have a huge amount of artificial leverage to hold down employee wages and increase their product prices. Not even to mention the absolutely absurd amounts of wealth inequality that is created through the Federal Reserve and the fractional reserve banking system having artificial interest rates and inflating the government's currency. In a free market, not only will you have a stable money supply with real interest rates, but you will not have a government that creates barriers to entry, and thus it will become impossible for monopolies to form.
You don't need government intervention to get a monopoly. All you need is a certain business that gains enough money to buy some of the land and infrastructure that they need to get the resources that their products are made out of. And then if they also buy some of the means of processing and production so that they can then fashion those resources into their products, and if they also buy a retail outlet then so that they can sell their product to the consumers, then once they have all those things, they have a lateral corporation or a lateral business. And a lateral business has advantage over everyone who's newly entering the market, because everyone who's newly entering the market has to buy things from other businesses so to run their own business with, and all those things that they have to buy are going to be marked up by the people that they're buying from, whereas the lateral business will not pay for any markups because they own everything they need to get all the stuff to run their business with. So the lateral business will make more profit and grow faster than all their competitors that are newly entering the market, and they can run their competitors out of business by lowering their prices really low since they don't pay for markups, and then they can bring their prices back up after they run all their competitors out of business, or they can just gain so much money that they buy out all their competitors. And even if you do believe that you need government intervention in order to form a monopoly, you cannot stop government intervention from eventually resulting from a free market because of the power addicts that I discussed before, and they will gain more and more power and money until they gain control over the government, and then they will change the laws to benefit themselves.
And therefore, you will have employee wages continuously going up, thanks to competing employers, and prices continuously going down, thanks to competing sellers. Thus, wealth will be far more evenly distributed in a free market than it currently is under this corporatized market. That isn't to say that wealth will be perfectly equal among everyone in a free market, but I don't think that the statistics the documentary showed about crime and so on were necessarily reflecting the result of an unequal distribution of wealth, but rather the result of an obviously rigged and unfair distribution of wealth. I doubt you will find as many people feeling that someone producing more value does not deserve more compensation. Instead, it is when someone who is not producing more value, but is still receiving an absurd amount of compensation, that people begin to become enraged. Another argument that was made is that it's more efficient to recycle everything than to start from scratch. This is demonstrably untrue. If it would cost more resources to recycle something than the amount of resources that it would cost to obtain new resources, then it is objectively less efficient to recycle. And as resources become more and more scarce while technology becomes more and more advanced, then the scales will tip to the other side and make recycling the more economical option. But not until then. This is a perfect illustration of why we need a price system. Because without a price system, these true but counterintuitive economic calculations would be completely ignored.
Well, in the beginning of your video, you seemed to be assuming that resources were scarce. But now you seem to be assuming that resources are unlimited, because you're saying that it's okay to take the resources and throw them away as long as you can make more money in the short run. Let's take your example of the car that is comprised of steel and aluminum, among other things. And you're saying it's okay to take that car and throw it away in a junkyard and then pull more of those same resources out of the environment again so that you can build another car. And you're saying as long as you can return more money to the private money investor in the short run, then that's okay. Even though you're taking those finite, irreplaceable resources of steel and aluminum and you are throwing them into a junkyard where they will rust and fall apart and we will never be able to get them back. And you're saying that we should wait until we have wasted so many resources that they become so scarce that the price goes up to the point where we are forced to recycle them. Well, I'm sorry, but that will inevitably lead to disaster. And that is a perfect illustration of why we need a scientifically determined system that is as sustainable and efficient as possible. The competitive free market system cannot possibly be cannot possibly be more efficient or better in any way than the best system that we can think of today, because the free market system was created more than 1,000 years ago, and the people who came up with that system did not have the advanced knowledge that we have today. So that system can't possibly be the most efficient system for us to use today. Just like today, we can't possibly think of the best system for people to use 1,000 years from now, because we don't have, in this day, the advanced knowledge that people will have 1,000 years from now. So we have to be constantly open to changing and adapting our system as our understandings grow. And you seem to want to move backwards into an old system that once existed, where everything was determined by the whims of consumers and the whims of businesses without any government laws or scientific laws governing it. But we can't move backwards into an old system. We have to move forwards into a new system that reflects our current understandings. And we have to continue to change our system and adapt it to our new understandings as those understandings grow. Doing anything else is blatantly illogical.
The film also talks about the horrors of consumerism, how businesses will make brand names and advertisements that actually create an artificial demand for overpriced products that nobody really needs. Now, first of all, let me point out that these million-dollar handbags are a reflection of the situation we are currently in, with a small group of people owning the majority of the wealth. Something I've already explained would not happen in an actual free market. Second, a large amount of this consumption culture we have is directly due to our Keynesian government creating all of these artificial incentives to spend our way deeper and deeper into debt. Imagine if I were to give you a credit card with a limit of infinity, and then told you that you could buy whatever you want and don't worry about paying it back. Of course, you would be incentivized to spend a lot more money, and thus this government-created artificial demand for consumption creates a scenario where businesses are more than happy to meet this artificial demand for stuff that people don't even need. But this is an artificial demand created by the government, holding fallacious Keynesian policies. Third, it's easy to think up solutions to this problem in a free market, such as advertising being almost completely done away with, and instead people would subscribe to ratings agencies that would review the cost and quality of the goods and services that businesses offer, thus taking the psychological influence out of the game quite a bit.
Well, I don't see how you can take advertising out of the market unless you create a law against advertising, and if you do that, then you wouldn't have a free market anymore. But let's continue.
But ultimately, this is an intellectual problem, not an economic one. And so long as parents had the demand for schools that would teach their children critical thinking skills, the profit-seeking schools would teach these skills to the students, and thus creating a new generation which would probably focus much more on technological progress and charity rather than unneeded consumption. The documentary also argues that technology creates unemployment. I can understand how easy it is to think this. After all, when we see a worker being replaced by a machine, it's obvious that the worker was laid off. But it's not so obvious. What's not so obvious are the new jobs that open up in an economy thanks to the improvement in technology. For over a century, we have created machines that dramatically improve the productivity of workers. Machines that allow one single person to accomplish things that would otherwise require hundreds or thousands of people. And at the same time, we've experienced a huge surge in our population. If the theory that technology creates unemployment is true, then we should be experiencing 99.999% unemployment.
Well, yes, I understand that historically, when powered machines or automation eliminated jobs in one sector, another sector opened up to absorb the job losses from that sector. In the 1800s, most people worked in agriculture, and when powered machines eliminated jobs in that sector, people moved to the manufacturing sector. And when automation technology eliminated jobs in manufacturing, people moved out of the manufacturing sector and into the service sector. And today, most people, at least in America, 85% of the people about work in the service sector. But I would like to know, what is the new sector that's going to absorb the job losses from the service sector as it becomes automated?
Machines are really good at physical labor, but us humans are really good at cognition, creativity, art, design, writing, philosophizing, and so on. And so the more machines take over doing the monotonous and laborious tasks, the more the door will open for us to focus on what we do best.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree that people will do more creative things and they will be able to do more valuable things once automation takes over laborious, monotonous tasks. But the problem is that money is not the best motivator for creative tasks. I would like to refer you to a YouTube video called RSA, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. It's not put out by Zeitgeist, by the way, but it cites scientific studies that show that money is a good motivator for mechanical, laborious tasks, but it's not a good incentive for creative problem solving and innovation. And this has been replicated over and over again in many different studies. The factors that lead to more innovation and more productive creative problem solving are autonomy and mastery. Autonomy is being self-directed. So if you're self-directed, you're more likely to be interested in the thing that you're doing, and that leads to more innovations, and it leads to more productive creative problem solving. Whereas if you just offer someone a bunch of money, they're more likely to be interested in the money and not as interested in the task that you're having them do. And so it leads to less innovations and less productive creative problem solving. And the second factor, besides autonomy, is mastery. Mastery is doing something that you get better at over time. And it's satisfying to do something that you get better at continuously, and that's why millions of people around the world play musical instruments, and most of them don't make any money from it. It's because they get better at it over time, and that's satisfying. And that has been shown to lead to more innovations and better creative problem solving.
And just because a machine might do better at laborious tasks than humans does not mean that it is always more economical to have a machine do those tasks. This is, once again, a perfect illustration of the bad assumptions made when there is no ability to calculate whether it is more efficient to produce something in a more or less capital-intensive way.
Well, that I don't agree with. How could you ever know if it's ever better to have a person do a monotonous task instead of a machine? Because every person has a human mind with incredible potential. And so if you use an automated machine to free that person from a monotonous task, they will have more time to follow their interests. And you don't know what amazing thing that person might come up with that extra time if you give it to them. So how could you possibly ever know if it's ever better to have a person do a monotonous task that a machine could do instead?
Now, it could very well be possible that someday robots will develop artificial intelligence that is superior to our intellectual abilities in every single way, and then they declare war on all humans and exterminate us. But hopefully, that's not going to happen anytime in the near future. And until then, I think it's safe to say that us humans will continue to find things to occupy ourselves with.
I don't care how advanced machines eventually become, because any person programming those machines will have incentive to program them carefully so that they serve people and so that they follow the orders people give them. Most living organisms today, have a self-preservation instinct and a desire to multiply and spread. And that's because living organisms evolved in a random, potentially dangerous environment And if any living organism, if any living organism didn't have a self-preservation instinct or a desire to multiply and spread, that organism would be more likely to die and not get to pass its genes on to the next generation. So that's why most living organisms have a desire to spread and multiply and a self-preservation instinct. But machines or robots don't evolve in a random, potentially dangerous environment. Machines exist however we create them. So if we do not program into machines a self-preservation instinct, they will not have one. If we do not program into robots a desire to multiply and spread, they will not have one, and they will not be a threat to us.
And lastly, the film argues that the unprecedented growth in wealth that we have seen in the past century is not due to markets, but is rather due to oil and science and technology. This is like me saying, I didn't shake your hand, my hand shook your hand. Of course, oil and science and technology had a profound impact on growing wealth. But what was behind these innovations? The pursuit of profit. Before J.D. Rockefeller found out that oil will have an enormous impact on offering our society cheap energy, oil was just thrown out. It was garbage. It was muck, as people thought. But Rockefeller, wanting to be as efficient as possible due to his incentive to gain the highest profit, found hundreds of different ways to use this stuff. It was the pursuit of profits that helped people to figure out that the division of labor will help a society become more efficient and produce more stuff. It was the pursuit of profit that helped individuals to build more and more capital so that our society can become more and more productive and increase the standard of living for everyone through lower prices and higher incomes.
I'm sorry, but Rockefeller did not discover how to convert oil into usable energy. It was the Dubinin brothers who first discovered that, and later Ignacy Lukasiewicz discovered how to take a more readily available form of oil and convert it into usable energy. Now, Ignacy Lukasiewicz did in fact make a great deal of money after he made his discovery, but he didn't make as much money as Rockefeller. The reason why Rockefeller made so much money was because he discovered how to form a monopoly, and he discovered how to, with ruthless indifference, take advantage of everyone who worked for him and everyone who depended on the oil that he was selling. Now, if you still disagree with me on the merits of a resource-based economy, that's okay, because I think we both agree that our current system is corrupt and it's failing and it needs to change. So I would like to see you as an ally, and I would be glad to cooperate with you to help wake up more of the people of our society to the fact that we do need a change. And once enough people wake up to that fact, they will stop participating in the system, and they will stop supporting the system, and all those people behind the system will lose all their power, and that will enable everyone who agrees with you to form a free market society, and that will enable everyone who agrees with me to form regional versions of resource-based economies. And we'll just see which society flourishes and has the higher standard of living, and we'll just see if you can maintain your free market. But the most important thing is that we need to work together. You and I and everyone who sees that this system is corrupt and that it's failing and that it needs to change, we all need to work together to wake people up so that we can build those new and better societies.